Well, for a look at what is making news in print and online this morning, we're joined by the Executive Director of the think tank, the Australia Institute, Ben Oquist. Ben, good morning to you. There is a big story across most of the front pages in Australia today, what's being called the biggest shake-up or the biggest shift in Australia's defence policy in decades.
Yeah, all the papers, as you say, on the front pages have got this foreshadowing a speech that the Prime Minister is giving today at the Australia Defence Force Academy here in Canberra, a update of defence strategy, the biggest update since the White Paper in 2016. And the Sydney Morning Herald says it's stealth missiles up the ante in the Pacific. And the Prime Minister is to announce new missile capability. Missiles not to be launched from land in Australia, but the ability for jet fighters to launch those missiles. The Daily Telegraph describes it in somewhat more tabloid terms as ScoMo goes ballistic. And the reports are that he's going to outline $270 billion worth of defence spending over the next 10 years, up from a previously allocated $195 billion that was mentioned in the White Paper in 2016.
Hey Ben, it's the Australian headline that I sort of have been interested in this morning because it's the one that actually mentions China. It says PM shoulders arms to China, but of course you're not going to hear the government saying that word, are you?
Well, the reports in the paper are that the Prime Minister talks about the need to spend more of our engagement in the Indo-Pacific, and he does comment on the tensions between the US and China. But while you're right, it's not going to be, and the Prime Minister's not going to say this is a deliberate hedge against China. All the speculation that this is about the rise of the power of China and the need for Australia to spend more on defence in some way as a hedge against that. Interestingly, there seems to be different reports about whether this is actually a real increase in Australia's GDP spending beyond the 2% that is projected to rise in the next little while. And the missiles that have been talked about can, apparently we've only got a capability for missiles to go 100 kilometres at the moment, and these missiles are going to be able to go over 300 kilometres. Interesting, though, an opinion piece by Peter Harcher that goes with this news story in the Sydney Morning Herald points out that still a long way short of Australia having an independent defence policy. The purchase of these missiles will still come from the United States, and that we're a long way from having an independent defence strategy, and we'll really have to rely upon our allies. As the Australia Institute's head of our International Security Affairs program, Alan Beam, pointed out to me the other day, is that, well, yeah, Australia could move from being a featherweight to a welterweight by bulking up its military. But we still face a heavyweight in China, and perhaps you just don't want to get into the ring. A long way to go in this debate, but it is going to be the big topic of conversation out of Canberra today.
Well, absolutely. The other one is stimulus. That's been bubbling away this week. The Australian economy and whether we're going to keep pumping money through or whether it's going to start to wind back. It's not on the front pages today, but you've spotted a yarn in the Age about it.
Yeah, Shane Wright reports on interesting comments from the Deputy RBA Governor, warning of the dangers of withdrawing fiscal stimulus too quickly in September. And this is going to be the big economic story, not just in the lead up to this kind of so-called mini-budget on July 23, but right through to what people are talking about as the September cliff. Those big government programs, JobSeeker, JobKeeper, the fact that the banks are deferring payments on loans, the ban on evictions in some places, a whole lot of programs due to end in September, and how the government deals with this so-called September cliff is going to be a big issue right the way through until September and beyond, potentially, as the government attempts to finesse that cliff. And really interesting comments by the RBA governor and many others who are warning against reducing fiscal stimulus too quickly. It's interesting because Australia effectively faces 3 budgets over the next 10 months, doesn't it, with this mini budget in July 23 and the full budget in October, and then the budget next year in May. And unwinding all these big stimulus programs is the major kind of economic challenge for the government and likely the political one. And I know there's been playing out in the Eden-Monaro by-election with agitation over whether the government should extend JobKeeper to certain industries in that electorate.
Hey Ben, just super quickly, the screen producers, tell us what's happening there.
Yeah, interesting story in the Financial Review. Bruce Baird, former Liberal MP for the seat of Cook, actually, where the Prime Minister now holds. He's calling for, along with former Labor leader Simon Crean, some more support for the domestic film and television production industry, in particular quotas on the likes of Netflix and Stan, and some increased tax breaks. Says that we're punching below our weight when it comes to producing domestic local TV and film production, and we've got to put some new rules on those big streaming services like Netflix and Stan, and some new tax breaks to encourage that local production in Australia.
Better leave it there. Ben Oquist, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Ben.